Welcome to Season 5 of How I Made It Through, and thank you for joining us. I have invited Ray Catania, author, metaphysical teacher, and coach, to join me as my co-host as we aim to engage, challenge, inspire, and teach you, our listeners, what it really means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. We'll explore not just concepts, but attempt to unravel the neuroscience of metaphysics, as well as practices designed to expand consciousness, increase healing, and develop a profound connection to love. We'll explore God, death, the afterlife, and pushing past limitations as we encourage you to break free of the trance of fear so that you may experience greater freedom, peace, and connection to yourselves, each other, and spirit. Bernadette Thompson is a gifted intuitive and ancestral healer, grief and spiritual coach, certified in grief and trauma, and owner of Tell Me Our Story Genealogy and Ancestral Healing. Welcome so much to the show, Bernadette.
Thank you, Kristin. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, what people who are listening don't know is that we have recently met and we're becoming fast friends. And it's been such a joy to get to know you. And, for me, it's appreciating the depth and positive intention of, I feel like, a really aligned soul.
Mm-hmm.
What I'd love to start with before you get into sharing what you do, why it matters, so people really get the benefit, what brought you to this?
What began my journey was my interest in family and in genealogy and, always very curious and wanting to know, just always wanting to know more about myself. I've always been a seeker. So on a spiritual side, I've very much been a seeker, and just knowing that there's more than we have always been, that we've never been taught about. And so I would say that is where I began. So I really worked a lot helping people just building their family trees. My spiritual awakening came when my husband was suffering from and had passed away from alcoholism. And it was during his disease and, the process of going through that was very traumatic, both for me and for our children. And it was then that the connection with my ancestors became so important, because they came in to my life and let me know they were there and guided me through this process.
Everyone has different clairs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Clairaudient, you can hear; clairsentience, clairvoyance, you can see. So many different clairs. How did they come through for you? And was this the first time they came through?
They came to me in different ways. So the first time that it happened, and I was, as a way, I grew up Catholic, as a way of um, kind of calming myself down. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but as I used the rosary, I was using the rosary. And this one night, I had what is called a visitation. And my great aunt, Sister Lou, she was a nun, suddenly came to me in what I thought was a dream, but there's a difference between dreaming and a visitation. And in this visitation, it was just the two of us sitting across from a table, almost like a Zoom, if you can imagine yourself. And I was afraid to look at her. I'm looking all around and I didn't want to look at her straight on. And she grabbed my hands and she had me look right at her. And she said, "We hear your prayers." And then I woke up.
Oh my gosh.
And I knew in that moment that she was with me, and that all of my ancestors and all of the women that I imagined around the table with me were with me.
Wow.
So that was the first one.
Okay.
So another time it was It must have been maybe a couple of months later. And I was still using the rosary. I would use it at night. There's a lot of chaos going on and trying to keep everything calm. And he was a wonderful man, had a beautiful soul.
Yeah.
So it's a terrible disease and it was difficult. So this one night I was saying the rosary and I started saying it in an Irish brogue. And if you asked me to talk in an Irish brogue right now, I wouldn't know how. I realized that this voice was coming through me, and
Wow.
that it was one of my I'm all Irish, and it was one of my Irish ancestors that had come in to pray with me and to let me know that she was there, and she was the voice of all of them, and they wanted it to be powerful enough that I knew that they were there with me. And so I just started, and it was in a specific dialect, like you could hear the very specific way of speaking. And this didn't happen just once, but this happened after that. It happened every time I said the rosary. And so those were the two most powerful moments that I had personally that began
Mhm.
this journey that I've been on. Mhm.
I am hearing the story about connecting with the women in your family through your ancestry. You also talk about having really identified a guide in our conversations. Who is that, and is that person part of your family, or is that more of a spirit guide?
That's a great question. My guide is a spirit guide,
Okay.
and it comes to me kind of more of a male. So he came in later, and I shared this story with you about, I was seeking, I was trying to connect, I was hoping and my husband had come in since then, and I knew that he was around, and I had plenty of signs, and so I definitely knew that his spirit was with me. But it was, somebody I knew who was connected, used a pendulum.
Mhm.
And so I decided I would try the pendulum, and I shared the story how I got one and asked it, tell me yes, and told me no, and it moved, and
Mhm. Mhm.
I was, dropped it because but it was through using the pendulum, surrounding myself with white light and
Yeah.
using the pendulum, that I began to have a conversation and asking, are you an angel? Are you a spirit guide? And they told me they were a spirit guide.
Oh, I love it.
That is how. Yeah.
Yeah. So many things about that. First, the trauma, and then the pendulum. The trauma, and Ray would bring so much to this conversation, but he and I, as well as other guests, have talked about how trauma really seems to be such an ever present feature
Mhm,
in empaths, intuitives, psychics, mediums, and the important role in terms of choosing a life path.
mhm,
That if we choose to do the work that trauma opens up, it also tends to open up some of those capabilities for many people. And then
mhm.
what I understand about the pendulum is that the pendulum really can work for anyone. And if you pick it up and you go through the process, it will start to move and you can identify what is a yes or no. But the important part about that, I have learned, is that prior to using it, much like you said in your story, create a relationship with your higher power, with the spirit,
Mhm.
however you define that, to be able
Yes,
to invite that
yes.
being
Mm.
into communicating through the pendulum. Otherwise, it can be a little unpredictable and not quite as reliable. Okay.
That is very true. Very true.
Well, let's go ahead and go on and talk about really then the intersection between you as an intuitive with the support of these ancestors as well as your spirit guide and
Mhm,
starting this business around ancestral healing.
mhm.
Tell us about your business.
So, what I realized as I was going through the ancestry, and then as I was going through my own spiritual awakening, is that I was helping people through the process of ancestral healing. When we would go back, I always focus on the stories of our ancestors. And as we look back, you can see the traumas that many of them experienced and their resilience. And we know now that trauma can be passed down to us. Science is telling us that trauma changes the way our genes express themselves, and that those changes can be passed down. So I also have a background I'm trained in grief and trauma. I worked for years with students who had experienced trauma. And I realized as I was taking my clients through their ancestry that they were having trauma responses and trauma reactions. And it opened me up to realizing that I needed to share with them and help them on this journey, on this ancestral healing journey. Ancestral healing is really the energy of our ancestors coming through and helping us understand not only the trauma that they went through, they want us to understand that some of our reactions that we're having in our lifetime may be from what they had experienced and that has come through the family. But also how important it is for us to understand how deeply connected we are with our ancestors, and that they are, I like to call them our number one guides, almost, because they're family. They have a closer spiritual connection with us. When I'm working with somebody and helping them discover their ancestry and the traumas and what is coming through as needing of healing, it often an ancestor will come through, or several ancestors will show me, this is the path we should be focusing on. This is the line of lineage that maybe there is a trauma or something that has affected the person that I'm working with. And for people who haven't really opened themselves up to the spiritual side, knowing that they're getting information from their ancestors feels a little safer.
Mm.
It feels like, okay, I may not be able to believe that there are spirits around me or that I can talk to a spirit, but I believe that my great grandmother is with me, and I have her ring, or I feel a specialness around her presence.
Mm.
So those are the types of things that our ancestors want to help us understand how close they are. And my examples of them being there during this really difficult time was amazing. I knew from that moment I never felt alone. Never.
Oh, yeah, and I feel like, well, I know people need that because in those moments of grief and loss and trauma,
Hmm.
we can often fall into the illusion
Right.
because the emotion is so heavy that we are alone.
Right.
So the mechanics of this is that you use ancestry.com.
Yes, I use Ant. There are many ways to
Mhm.
research. For
Mhm.
me, that just happens to be the one that I'm the most skilled in terms of, so it's a quicker process for me. But there
Yeah.
are other ways. But yes, creating an ancestry tree and
Yeah.
looking back at the stories, there are many documents and records that tell that story.
Yeah.
And you don't really realize that it's there if you just dig a little bit.
Right. You are currently doing this for me, which is such an unbelievable gift. And being able to take a look and unfold stories that I may have had a sort of a hazy awareness of, but then
Mhm,
to be able to see it
mhm.
coupled with what you bring as an intuitive to the experience. I'm happy for any of my stories to be shared, but can you bring it to life if you would talk about without naming names, but types of stories that reveal?
Yes, if you don't mind, I think your grandmother's story is incredible. When I first found your grandmother, it was she and a couple of siblings. Well, the last census that I found your grandmother in, she was the oldest of 14 children
Right.
and a girl. So she would have been essentially a nanny. She would have been responsible for caring for these children.
Yes.
But the more, and so there would, just in that alone would have been a difficult job that she was born into. But what also happened is that of these 14 children, only 9 of them survived.
Yes.
And they died while she was growing up. So it wasn't they all passed at once. So she was experiencing loss, deep loss.
Yeah.
Her sibling that was just below her
By
was,
like 2 years.
yeah, yeah, I know. And then sadly, her mother passed away, and the 14th child passed away. Her mother passed away in childbirth.
It's so tragic. Like, I'm listening to it and I feel chills and I wanna cry for the sadness.
Yeah,
What must have happened inside the walls of that home?
right, right. The next record that I found is that she had left and she was married. And it was all in the same year that her mom had died. And, so you wonder, did she run away?
Yeah.
Did she, the trauma of that, like, just like,
Mhm.
I can't carry anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you shared some things about her, that she had some troubles in her life and that she was not always thought of very well, you know?
No, well, you're being very, very polite.
Mhm. Yeah.
So she was, known for being crazy and cruel and bipolar, and the story that I have is that I didn't know that she was married before she married my grandfather, but you
Mhm.
revealed that. And then the story I had from my aunt and my father is that my father, as you saw in his picture, was very, very handsome. He was very beautiful. And so was she, apparently, although I never met her. But she, in I think manic episodes, would grab him and leave the home, and they would travel all over the South, and she would either pretend to be a movie star or a princess, and she would have affairs over and over and over again.
Mhm.
And then when the mania would go away, she would
Mhm.
have depressive episodes where she wouldn't get out of bed, and she was not kind to people. And so I just hear I've got this crazy grandmother who was really abusive, and she basically abandoned my father's sister, and I think God, thank goodness she was the lucky one. But when
Mhm.
you look back and think she was born close to the turn of the century,
Right.
and she was basically a nanny from the time that she could probably,
Mhm.
feed and put her own clothes on, and that
Mhm.
her mother died in such a tragic way, for me, it opened up
Yeah.
compassion, where before
Yeah.
it was just like sort
Yeah.
of there was this dark woman who did these dark things.
Yeah. And it's forgiveness, and it is
Yes.
it is so healing. And we think about the resilience that your father was able to. I mean, you are such a beautiful example of the resilience in the family, because that's what we get when we look back and we can see sometimes these traumatic things that have happened. And sadly, your story is not unusual.
Right.
There are many difficult things that happen to people in their lives, and things that are passed down. And I, after my father passed, and really it was more after my husband passed, I found a story about my grandmother's sisters that had been in orphanages for years and years, and I had never had that knowledge. So
Yes.
it is, as we go through the process of not only looking at your ancestral tree, which is fun to look at. You find out who has Uncle Larry's ears, where they came from. I mean, there's
Yeah.
lots of wonderful things, but
Yeah.
it's also this, you understand, not define yourself in the way that you have to stay there, but that you actually don't have to carry those
Yes.
wounds with
Yes. Because back to the epigenetics you were talking about, that
you.
trauma can express itself through, through
Mhm.
genetics. The awareness is the invitation to
Yeah.
stop the generational trauma. And
Mhm.
so when I think about so many of the guests that I've had on the show and thinking about our soul's contracts,
Right.
that it's both the epigenetics and both of, life between lives before we came into this earthly incarnation,
Mhm.
We created a blueprint to say, what do I want to learn? How do I
Mhm.
want to evolve? What do I want to experience? And that we have these soul families. So
Yes.
it's both the genetics and the spiritual
Mhm.
ancestry. And to say, with this awareness, how do I, if I say yes, how do I say yes to healing? Because you can look back and go, my God,
Mhm.
what they endured and how has that found expression in my own life. And I could certainly talk for hours about how that has found expression in my life with my relationship with my father and,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
um, but it just feels like this incredible gift if we say yes to it, to
Mhm.
being able to show ourselves compassion
Mhm.
to the process of healing, recognizing it didn't just start with us.
And it also opens up, so many of us, me included, had always wanted to understand, to be able to connect with the spirit realm. And when we invite our ancestors in, there are ways, and I help people understand some of the ways that we can begin to have a relationship that eventually can turn into where you do have a guide that you're very aware of. But there are so many ways to connect with your family that's passed, and it is, so your grandmother, I feel her spirit. I know that she wanted her story told.
Mm.
She needed for that, for you, she needed that. And it is just to allow the world to know that mental health, I mean, just if we started there, that mental health can come from trauma.
Yes.
That's,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. God, I feel her right now too. I feel her right now too that she's been wanting to be heard.
Yeah.
As we start to go into wrap up, these conversations go really quickly. Um, you said you are sometimes when people are open to it, part of what you provide as someone who is an intuitive, as these stories reveal themselves, opening up to their ancestors or their spirit guides. What is one way that you teach that or guide that?
So what I do is take you through a process of uncovering as we go through and look at the ancestry. And some people may have some done already, but
Mhm.
we uncover the stories. And then, we talk about the tenets, or I include the tenets of compassion and wisdom and forgiveness and resilience and loving kindness, those, and divine or universal love, to help us go through, understand what we are going through in our lifetime,
Mm.
and helping us to grow through not only our deep connection with our ancestors, but it helps us to feel that compassion for ourselves, feel that forgiveness for ourselves. So many of us, when we experience a great loss, or something traumatic happens in our lives, that we feel stuck and we can't move forward. So this process, although it seems unusual, is helping you to truly understand who you are, and also to see yourself in a different light, and give yourself a way to grow and lift and move forward. There is a very joyful side to this is heavy. What we're talking about is
Mhm.
heavy, but
Mhm.
moving through it, as I said, discovering uncle, who got Uncle Larry's ears and how they were passed down. And there are the ears, you should see them in my family. But there's joyful, so it is taking us through and understanding that some of the heaviness we're feeling isn't ours to carry, and that we can put it down.
Ah,
And I coach people through, I give them, tips and things to work on. We work through, um, there is a, um, kind of a format that I follow to help them understand how to go through this process, as we also go through the ancestry. So we combine them, we bring them together. So you're
yeah.
working on not just discovering your ancestors, but also in helping you understand. And the ancestors come in. So on our journey, you will feel their presence and you will know who is with you.
Yeah. God, that's just miraculous. It's you really paying it forward, this marriage of
Yeah.
both the ancestry
Mhm.
and you being informed as a coach who, informed in trauma and grief.
Mhm.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about your work that you would think, gosh, I wish I had had an opportunity because people need to understand this?
I left one thing out of my bio that I should have mentioned. I also am certified, professionally certified as an end of life doula.
That's right.
So I have worked with the elder population and helping them and their families
Yes.
go through the process of understanding what passing is going to look like, what the feelings that not only the person that is getting ready to cross over, but what the family is going to experience and how that connection can stay alive even when they pass. So it's the knowledge that I have from the work that I've had in my life, working with grief and trauma, that truly helps me understand. And I can see in somebody the responses and the reactions that they are having that are connected to those experiences.
Ah, beautiful. You're just such a light worker. I'm so grateful to have met you. And I just want as many people as possible to know that you are there because
Mm-hmm.
there's no one who is not touched by grief and trauma. And if
Mm-hmm.
the time feels right to reach out to someone who can hold it with not just training and skill, but with heart and being connected to ancestors and to spirit, because this is just the cry of humanity for all of our awakening to recognize that there's
Yes.
this web that we can tap into to
Mm-hmm.
help. What I always forget to say in all of this is please subscribe, like, share. These are the messages that can make a huge difference in people's lives if it's not already making a difference in yours, to recognize I need this, I want this, or I want to learn more. So for
Mm-hmm.
those who do want to reach out to you, or at least just kind of sleuth around and say, what is she doing? Well, maybe I'm ready, maybe not yet. How do they find you?
So my website is tellmeourstory.com. It comes from the story. I mean, the name comes from the point of view of the child asking the parent, tell me our story.
Mm. Oh, I love
And so it brings in that story of our ancestors. So tellmeourstory.com. I am also on Facebook, Tell Me Our Story. I'm on Instagram. It is Tell Me Our Story Ancestral Healing. So you can find me. I offer time together, schedule some time with me, and we can talk about, the questions that you may have about what this looks like. And I can share more about the process. And we can just have that conversation around. And I also, if you go to my website, there is a free download on how to get started and thinking about what do I know about my ancestors, and how can I discover, even begin this discovery on my own?
I love it. I love it. So before we go, I'm just going to ask you one final question. Because on this show, as you're doing, we talk about crossing over, we talk about life. You get to the end of yours, you're on the other side. What will you feel most proud of in terms of your work on this planet?
Hmm, that's amazing. I think my job is to not only to facilitate the healing, but to open people up, that to raise the vibration of the planet.
Mm.
And I believe that as I do this work, that I will look back and say, look at the seeds that I sowed and
Mm.
the level of energy that has come up. And that's really what I would love.
It's
I
beautiful.
feel, yeah.
Yeah, I feel you doing that right now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking your time. It was wonderful to have you as our guest.
Thank you, Kristin. So grateful for our connection.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.